Do-do-do-do-da-da. Welcome in, YouTube. Hello and welcome to another video. You guys were like, Paws, have you seen the gingerbread video? I'm like, no, what gingerbread video? So here we are, watching the gingerbread video. I don't even like gingerbread, but you know what I like? Tasting history.
During the American Revolution, one of George Washington's greatest weapons was a German baker named Christopher Ludwig. Baker General of the Continental Army and master of gingerbread like this recipe from 1773. So thank you to Factor for sponsoring this video as we make gingerbread for the American Revolution. This time on Tasting History. Before he became involved in the American Revolution, Christopher Ludwick was a baker of gingerbread to the citizens of Philadelphia.
Okay.
Now, in the 18th century, gingerbread could come in a few different forms, but one of the most common was a sort of hard gingerbread that was made in molds like the ones that you see behind me. And that's the type that Ludwig was famous for. In fact, his gingerbread molds can still be seen at the Museum of the American Revolution.
Those are fancy
so in my attempt
molds
to make this sort of gingerbread, I am going to follow a 1773 recipe from John Townsend's The Universal Cook or Lady's Complete Assistant, which gives instructions to make gingerbread. Take 1.5 pounds of treacle, 2 eggs beaten, half a pound of brown sugar, 1 ounce of ginger beaten and sifted, of cloves, mace, and nutmegs all together, 1/2 ounce, beaten very fine, coriander seeds and caraway seeds of each 1/2 ounce, 2 pounds of butter melted. Mix all these together with as much flour as will knead it into a pretty stiff paste. Then roll it out and cut it into what forms you please. Bake it in a quick oven on tin plates. A little time will bake it. So this recipe is quite different from most modern gingerbreads in a few ways. First of all, it's going to be harder because there is no chemical leavener like baking powder added to it. Second, there are a lot more spices. In addition to ginger, you get things like mace, which is the webbing around a nutmeg, and caraway seed. Third, it makes so much gingerbread. This recipe would make enough for you, your friends, everyone that you've ever met in your life, and probably a few people that you haven't. So I'm going to cut it down in half, and it's still going to make a lot of gingerbread. So for this recipe, what you'll need is 7 cups or 840 grams of all-purpose flour, 2.5 tablespoons or 14 grams of ginger, 1 teaspoon or 2 grams of cloves, 1.5 teaspoons or 2.5 grams of mace, 1.5 teaspoons or 2.5 grams of nutmeg, 1 tablespoon or 7 grams of ground coriander seeds, and 1 tablespoon or 7 grams of ground caraway seeds. Then 1 cup or 340 grams of treacle or molasses, 1 cup or 225 grams of brown sugar, 2 cups or 450 grams of melted salted butter, and 1 egg. Definitely one of the more complicated recipes for gingerbread that I've come across, but it does sound quite delicious. Something else that is quite delicious and yet surprisingly uncomplicated is preparing a meal from today's sponsor, Factor. As we're at this time of year, everything just seems to get so busy that I hardly have any time to cook anything except for what I'm baking for the show.
I still need to look if there's anything like that in the US.
Instead of relying on takeout, which can get very expensive and is generally unhealthy,
in the EU.
I like to rely on meals from Factor because they only take 2 minutes to prepare. And they also keep me hitting my nutritional goals. Their menu of over 100 weekly options includes something for everyone, no matter your preference or diet. And their chef-crafted meals
Whenever I see
fresh,
these, I'm like, man, it looks so
delicious. And they're delivered right to your door. So when you're ready to eat, there is no meal planning, there's no cooking, and there's no cleanup. And that's what I really love. So to give Factor a try, head to factor75.com or just click the link in the description and use my code TastingHistoryFB50 and you will get 50% off of your first box plus free breakfast for an entire year.
They're catering
That's code
for offices.
TastingHistory50 at factor75.com for
That's
50%
what I've been using
off of your first box plus free breakfast for a year. And now, let us get back to our gingerbread. So first start by adding all of the spices to the flour, and it helps to pass them through a sieve to make sure that they're nice and fine. And then whisk them into the flour. In a separate bowl, add your brown sugar, the melted butter, and the treacle. You also want to add the beaten egg here. I forgot to do so. It's sitting out on the counter, so you'll see where I add that later on. Then you're going to mix all of these wet ingredients together. And if you have a stand mixer, this is the time to use it because this recipe, once you add all that flour in especially, even though it's only half the original amount that he gives, makes so much dough, it's kind of hard to work with without a stand mixer or a really big bowl. Once the sugar and the wet ingredients are well mixed, add in the flour about a third at a time. And you want
That
to mix it
almost
on
looked
low
like chocolate.
just until it's incorporated. And then this is where I realized I forgot my egg on the counter and decided to add it in. And once everything is mixed together, you want to give it just a few good kneads and then let it rest for 20 to 30 minutes. And while it rests, you can decide how you're going to
That's a small
form your
resting
gingerbread.
period.
You can make it just into little rounds, much easier and just as tasty. Or if you've got molds and you've got some patience and gumption,
I'm definitely a
you
foodie.
can
I had
try
food.
making the gingerbread in the molds, and you'll
And I want
definitely end
food
up
again.
with a cooler looking product. Like when I was in the Czech Republic earlier this year in a town called Český Krumlov, we went to a gingerbread shop and they had all
my
of this cool
God.
gingerbread which had been made in molds. And I got
That's
this
so
one that depicts
cool.
the biblical story of Judith and Holofernes. In that story, Judith beheads Holofernes, and so this gingerbread Judith, who is dressed in a 16th century outfit, is holding a sword in one hand and the severed head of Holofernes in the other.
freaking
Doesn't that just
cool.
put you
What?
in the holiday spirit? Of course, for most of history, gingerbread actually wasn't tethered to Christmas like it is usually
wasn't?
done now. Gingerbread was an all-year-round treat. But since the holidays are upon us, I have decided to use two molds that remind me, at least, of the holidays.
It's St. Nicholas today when we're watching this. So it's like, oh, that's so fitting.
The first is a rather
is so,
large
so
mold
fitting.
of St. Nicholas himself. And with him,
Happy
he has
name day
three
to all
children. Those three children are likely from the
Nick-related
story of when
people
St. Nick
that are
resurrected three children who had been killed by a butcher who wished to sell them as ham.
Excuse you, what? Excuse you, what? Okay. I was gonna ask, like, what is your tradition when it comes to St. Nicholas? Because here, St. Nicholas, you basically put things in shoes. Like, you put gifts in shoes. St. Nick will come to children and deliver usually fruit, but sometimes candy. Sometimes even more. Like, you get gifts for St. Nicholas, specifically for kids. So, like, that's always been a thing. Like, pretty big. Not limbs, yeah. Not we didn't have the ham thing over here. Yeah, we didn't have ham.
And so he put them in a pickling tub filled with salt. But jolly old St. Nick was not fooled and knew those kids were not ham, and so he resurrected them and brought them back to life. A story you definitely won't be hearing on the Polar Express. But that is where St. Nicholas actually got the connection to make him the patron saint of children. The other mold, which is a more tenuous Christmas connection, is smaller and in the form of a sea goat, which is a mythical creature from ancient Mesopotamia, which would then turn into the star sign Capricorn.
That's so
and I
cool,
chose it
such a cool
because it
mold.
reminds me of the anti-St. Nicholas,
Krampus!
In Alpine folklore, while St. Nicholas brings good children fruit and nuts, Krampus punishes naughty children by stuffing them in a sack and beating them with chains and birch branches every December 6th. Who doesn't love a good Christmas demon? And since that story is from southern Germany, Bavaria, Austria area, not too far from where Christopher Ludwick was actually born, I figured it was a good connection.
That's actually
and so
a good
I'm gonna
one,
start
yeah.
with that one. So mix about 2 parts flour to 1 part cornstarch, and then generously dust the inside of the mold with it and brush out any of the excess. Then take out a ball of the gingerbread dough and roll it out on a piece of parchment until it's a bit larger than the mold and
I want
about a quarter
caramel
of
now.
an inch thick. And the thickness is really going to depend on how
Looking at
deep your
this.
mold is. Some of them are really, really deep, so you need thicker gingerbread.
In the US, he fills stockings with little gifts and leaves the big presents under the tree. How is he different than Santa then, for you? Because, like, for us, Santa does the whole under the tree gift. Hence why St. Nicholas is, I don't know why it's related to shoes for us. You always had the gifts in your shoes, so you would clean and lay out your shoes. And the cheat there as a kid was you always had multiple pairs of shoes because every single pair was getting filled.
So set the mold over the dough and press down hard but evenly pressured, and I found that it helps to actually gently roll the back of the dough through the parchment as well. Then carefully and evenly remove the mold from the dough.
Oh, that's
and if
so
your dough sticks to the mold, then you might
cool.
need more flour in the dough itself. Now to maintain the definition of the imprint, you want to let it actually sit out to dry for a few hours, and it kind of hardens on the top so that when it bakes, the expansion is on the bottom and not on the top. So let it dry for 6 to 8 hours on some parchment. And since those did so well, I decided I got a little cocky and I was going to try the much larger and frankly deeper St. Nicholas mold, which was a lot harder. The first go, it easily came out of the mold, but it didn't have much definition in the face, and the second go got the definition, but poor Nick's head fell off. I did reattach it, but I'm guessing it's going to be a rather weak spot, and so I don't think it'll actually stick on while it's baking. We'll find out. Now, if you don't have molds, you can simply roll the dough out to about 1/8 of an inch thick and cut it into either rounds or any other shape, including the classic gingerbread man. And if you opt for that, then you don't have to leave them out to dry. You can just pop them in the oven at 375 degrees Fahrenheit, 190 Celsius for 10 to 12 minutes. If you do opt for the molds, then once they've dried for a few hours, you'll want to bake those at a lower temperature of 300 degrees Fahrenheit, 150 Celsius for 20 to 22 minutes, depending on the size of the cookie. And it is this larger type of molded gingerbread that was very, very popular in the 18th century, and it is how Christopher Ludwick, hero of the American Revolution, made his first fortune.
We have them in a lot of shapes over here. I think gingerbread is very, very popular when it comes to Christmas events. You always see it in every shape and form possible, like from houses, from like Hansel and Gretel to like the gingerbread man to stockings. You have so much when it comes to it. The gingerbread boy first appeared in print in the US. In the United States of America in May 1875, issues of St. Nicholas magazine, American Commercialism. Interesting. It's definitely one of, like, when I think of gingerbread, it's definitely one of the more prominent shapes that comes to mind. Despite everything, despite, like, growing away from it, it's still pretty influential.
Ludwick, or Ludwick as it would come to be spelled, was born in 1720 in Gießen in the German state of Hesse. His father was a baker, and while details of his early life are sparse, it's assumed that it was from his father that he first learned to bake. But as a teenager, he wasn't that interested in baking. He wanted a bit of adventure, so at the age of 17, he enlisted in the Austrian army during the Austro-Russian-Turkish War. During the war, he served as a man-at-arms and continued to serve in the military when he found himself on the besieged end of the 17-week-long siege of Prague in 1741. And the siege ended in the city falling to the French and Bavarians, which led to Ludwig being conscripted into the Prussian army.
Bet he wish he was a baker then.
Now, at the first rather brief moment of peace that he could find, Ludwig left the continent and instead went to England, where he returned to his baker roots as a baker in the British Royal Navy. After a few years in the East Indies, where he did some shrewd business dealings and got a bit of an inheritance from his father, he ended up not in London, but in Philadelphia with a bunch of clothes that he started to sell. Then with the proceeds, he returned to London. Here he spent 9 months in learning the confectionery business and the making of gingerbread. In the year 1754, he returned to Philadelphia with a number of gingerbread prints and immediately set up his business of family and gingerbread baker in Letitia Court. And there he worked making gingerbread until he retired in 1774 with the honorary title Governor of Letitia Court.
Governor?
So by that time, he had led a full life and had been very successful. He had 9 houses in Philadelphia and a rather large, decently sized farm, at least, outside of Germantown, and a good amount of savings. So he could have just kind of sat back and enjoyed his retirement.
25 could never,
but that's not the kind of guy he was. See, he was a patriot and devoted to the patriot.
You know, when your boomer parents or like boomer grandparents tell you that you need to do more in life, just show them this video and be like, maybe you should do more in life because you don't have 9 houses. Many years ago, he was able to buy 9 houses. You weren't capable of that. Why do you think I'm capable of that? Show them this video to shut him up.
Patriot's cause. And so when he heard the shot heard round the world, that is the opening shot of the American Revolution at the battles of Lexington and Concord, he got involved in the cause, attending meetings and conventions in Philadelphia, where he really believed that they needed to break away from Britain at pretty much any cost. Then in 1776, at one of these meetings, It was proposed that should anyone want to join the Continental Army, they could do so, but they had to pay for their own firearms, something that many people could not afford to do.
Damn.
So it's recorded that he stood up and in broken English, but in a loud and animated voice, said, "Mr. President, I am but a poor gingerbread baker, but put my name down for 200 pounds. And that is essentially how Christopher Ludwick became involved in the revolution. And despite the fact that he said he was a poor baker, he was not. He had 9 houses and a farm.
He was poor in, not in assets. He was poor in available, what's the word, Cha? What's the word? Liquidity, thank you. He was poor in liquidity.
And 200 pounds is... It's hard to say exactly how much it would be today, but somewhere in the vicinity of maybe $40,000. Now, as if opening his pocketbook wasn't enough, the following summer, the 55-year-old German baker enlisted in the army. Obviously, he was too old to do much fighting by that time, but he was able to use his powers of persuasion to get Hessians, the German mercenaries fighting for the British, to defect to the Patriots' side. It all started when 8 Hessian prisoners were brought into the camp that he was at, and the idea was to imprison them, but he went to the officers in charge and said, "You know what, let me actually take these men to Philadelphia on a sort of field trip. I know these men. We're from the same place, and I know how miserable their life is back in Europe. So let me show them how wonderful a German immigrant's life in Philadelphia can be. Let me show them our fine German churches. Let them see how our tradesmen eat good beef, drink out of silver cups every day, and ride out in chairs every afternoon. And then let us send them back to their countrymen, and they will all soon run away and come and settle in our city and be as good Whigs as any of us." And shockingly, they agreed.
Crazy gamble.
He took them to Philadelphia and then released them, and it actually worked.
Imagine being so proud of your region that you are convinced that you're going to make people defect and come to your side because life is so good. Can you imagine that in 2025? Like, being able to go and tell people, like, hey, it's so much better over here. Damn.
They ended up defecting to the Patriots' cause. It worked so well that not long after, the Congress enlisted him to infiltrate a camp on Staten Island, and there he convinced what ended up being hundreds of Hessian soldiers to leave, desert the British, and go live in Philadelphia. But while the Hessian mercenaries did dog the Continental Army, there was a worse foe on the horizon, and that was hunger. In those early years, the army was rather ragtag, and there was little consistency in the feeding of the troops, both in quantity and quality of the ration, especially bread. So in May 1777, the Congress sent word that Christopher Ludwick be, and he is hereby appointed Superintendent of Bakers and Director of Baking in the Army of the United States.
Director of... what? What? Excuse you? There was a Director of Baking as an official title in the Army of the United States. Does that still exist? I am just like, huh? That sounds really freaking awesome and amazing and weird and something you don't think of when you think of the army.
By order of Congress, John Hancock, President. They charged him with delivering 1 pound of bread for every 1 pound of flour that he received, and he said, "No, gentlemen, I will not accept of your commission upon any such terms. Christopher Ludwick does not want to get rich by the war. He has money enough. I will furnish 135 pounds of bread for every 100 of flour you put into my hands." And that's because once you add leavener and water to the flour, then the bread ends up actually being heavier than the initial amount of flour.
What a good man.
Congress just didn't know much about baking. Anyway, when General George Washington heard of this appointment, he wrote to Congress saying, "I trust the appointment of Mr. Ludwick as Superintendent of Baker will have the salutary consequences you mention. I have been long assured that many abuses have been committed for want of some proper regulations in that department." Ludwig immediately set out to reform, or maybe form up for the first time, a system of baking bread for the army. First, he started by setting up two large ovens, one that would bake a soft bread meant to be eaten that day, and then another type of bread that could last for weeks or even months, known as hard bread or hardtack.
I don't think I've had hardtack, or at least not that I could think of. Sure, you can make bread last a lot in freezers now, but like, I don't think I've ever had that specific type. Huh, that's interesting. But also really cool the fact that they were getting fresh bread. Like, imagine having freshly baked bread for your army. That's really awesome. It's rock solid. Yeah, I can imagine, like, from the definition of it. How do you just put it in water before you eat it?
The issue was that while Congress set aside money to pay for the flour, they didn't really have enough funds to pay for a bunch of ovens or a bunch of bakers, and so Ludwig usually ended up paying for those things out of his own pocket. It didn't help that he actually had trouble finding enough bakers to bake the bread itself, so whenever he had any free time, he would go into Philadelphia and try to recruit people who knew anything about baking to his cause. He and his growing army of bakers then followed George Washington's men from their defeat at Brandywine to their defeat at Germantown, and eventually ended up settling in Valley Forge to spend the winter of 1777 and 78. There, Ludwig set up more ovens, but he was quickly running out of money, and actually to pay his bakers, he ended up having to sell one of his houses in Philadelphia.
That's crazy! I mean, holy shit, that man is such a good man to, like, actually use his own money for that. But that's crazy over the fact that he was appointed the director of bakers, didn't have the people, and they didn't give him funds to actually get the necessary equipment. That's insane! Like, what? He was just given a position and told, well, good luck, figure it out.
And eventually, he ended up basically spending all of his money, and he was pretty much bankrupt.
Jesus!
Still, when in late spring of 1781, Ludwig accompanied Washington's army to Yorktown, he didn't bat an eye when the general ordered 6,000 pounds of bread to be baked, saying, "Let it be good, old gentlemen, and let there be enough of it, if I should want myself." Ludwig and his wife ended up baking 6,000 pounds of bread in one day, which is amazing, but it must have taken it out of the old guy, because not long after the surrender at Yorktown, he did decide to leave the army and returned to Philadelphia, where he was pretty much broke.
Imagine, like, yeah, I want 6,000 pounds of bread. I'd leave too, man.
Couldn't even afford new sheets, but he didn't want to go into debt, so he slept without sheets for several weeks.
Oh my God.
Most of his properties that he hadn't sold were completely destroyed by the occupying British, like his farm at Germantown. And the little reimbursements that he had gotten from Congress were pretty much eaten up by inflation by the time that he actually received them.
That's so
a few years later, in 1785, when Congress was reimbursing a lot of the people that had put money in to pay for the revolution, he wrote to them asking if he could get some of that money back, and he never really heard back, so he wrote to George Washington asking essentially for a character reference. "As your excellency often expressed a friendship and regard for your old baker master, I now beg leave to acquaint you that, finding my private property greatly injured and diminished, I have been obliged to apply to Congress for compensation. In order to ensure my success, I wish to have a recommendatory letter from your excellency in my behalf."
Did he get
So Washington did write a recommendation letter to Congress on behalf of Christopher Ludwig, and after some time, after Ludwig had put out tens of thousands of dollars of his own money, Congress decided to give him $200 as a gratuity for his services.
Are you kidding me? Are you... My blood is boiling and I'm not even living in the same... I'm not even living in the same time! Bro, what the fuck? Oh my God, what a slap in the face. What a... Dude.
But ever resilient, and now in his late 60s, Ludwig decided to reestablish himself in the city of Philadelphia as a baker. And in 1797, as an epidemic of yellow fever came across the city, anyone who had any means left the city so they didn't get sick.
$200 is basically what he paid initially for the revolution to start. He got his deposit back. Nothing about all the money that he spent while he was actually employed in the army. No compensation at all for that.
Leaving pretty much just the poor behind. The poor and Christopher Ludwick, who stayed behind, even though he had the means to leave, to bake bread for free for the poor who could not escape. By 1801, he had regained much of the money that he had spent and once again had a sizable fortune, but now he was
did it again,
sick and dying of a lung illness. And when someone came to him and offered him a subscription, said, "Hey, do you want to subscribe to this upcoming biography of George Washington?" he replied, "No, I will not. I am traveling fast to meet him. I will then hear all about it from his own mouth."
Damn.
And on June 17th, 1801, he died, leaving most of his fortune to different charities,
what a
including
good man.
$13,000, which is like $6 million today, to establish
Damn.
a school that would educate the poor for free.
Bro, what a good actual man. What an insanely humbling character to do all of that.
Regardless of the country, extraction, or religious principles of their parents or friends. A good man, a patriot, and a baker of wonderful gingerbread like
Imagine
this
if we
version
had
that
more
I'm
people
about
like
to
him,
eat.
yeah.
And here we are.
Oh! It turned out amazing. It looks really good.
Gingerbread from 1773. It smells so good in this house, and I gotta say, I am darn proud of how well this turned out. This is the
You
first time
should
I've
be.
ever
It's
used
really
a mold to
cool.
make cookies, and I was not sure if it was gonna work out, but it did. And I mean, I got all of the definition. Smells absolutely wonderful. As far as Saint Nick goes, so the definition is there, but poor guy lost his head as soon as I took it out of the
Oh, that looks so
oven,
soft though.
as it was
when he like
drying it or cooling, came out, and his
it
little
still looks very soft.
head fell off. But that's okay. I'm sure
it
it'll
looks
still
really
taste
good.
But I'm gonna instead taste this sea goat / Krampus. So it's not super hard. There's some softness to it. It's not like a ginger snap. But
You
here
can
we go.
see it.
Mm.
It definitely looks very
Really
soft
good.
from like the way he's biting into it as well.
I was worried it was going to be dry. It's not. Would it benefit from a cup of tea or a cup of hot cocoa? Absolutely, but what wouldn't?
it's so true when
But
it
the
comes
flavor
to.
is there. Hmm.
I'm curious like how the flavor would actually be with all those spices, because it's a lot of extra spices.
It's not as
added.
gingery as gingerbread is today, but it's more complex.
might actually be
You've
good
got all these other spices in there that
for
you
me.
don't usually see in gingerbread today.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really nice. So if you're not going to make this and you're just making regular gingerbread, modern gingerbread, add a little caraway, add a little mace, add some other things just to spice it up.
Lack of better wording, just
So
spice
enjoy
it
your
up.
gingerbread. Enjoy any baked goods this holiday season. I feel like I just bake a lot of things and eat a lot of baked things around this time of year. And I will see you
haven't
next
baked in
time
ages,
on Tasting
chat.
History.
I'm like, should I? It's not that bad. I actually like baking. I used to bake bread a lot. So I'm like, maybe I should bake something for Christmas. Oh, this is really cool though. This is really cool. I liked it. I liked the video. It was nice to learn about things and such an amazing character behind it all that I did not know about. I wish more people were like that. I wish more people were kind and charitable and did more for those out there rather than just themselves. And it's a very fitting video for the Christmas spirit. I feel like, at least in my opinion. So yeah, there's that. YouTube, if you have managed to get this far, I appreciate you. And let me know what kind of baked goods you are going to bake for this Christmas, because I assume some of you might actually try this recipe. I'm not a fan of gingerbread. I've never been a fan of gingerbread. I would try it out of curiosity, maybe like half of a recipe. maybe a quarter. That would be better. I might give that a try. See if I like all the spices being added. Until next time, YouTube. Bye bye!